ground. You want them to explode amongst the target.
Now, there's not going to be an actual projectile that you're firing today.
No,
they're going to take out the
Jessamine County farmers probably wouldn't appreciate it at all. Josephine will
ground beef.
If we were firing a projectile from Josephine, it would go about 1,800 yards. Okay. From the rifled pieces, they have a maximum range of about 1.5 miles.
Oh my gosh!
And the rifle pieces were very, very accurate. I've read diaries of artillerists practicing. They would knock a doorknob out of a door at 500 yards, five football fields.
Wow.
So they're very, very accurate and very deadly.
How long does it take between reloading? Like, how many time period?
It's possible to fire close to 3 rounds a minute. That's pretty fast. Yes. The men were well trained, and each man on the detachment was trained in all positions, so that as casualties may occur, they could rotate. A piece can be fired safely with 2 men. Very slow, but it can be done. The artillery, the effect was not so much speed, but accuracy. You know, you're going to reach out much further with the rifles, or even Josephine, than the muskets, smoothbore muskets, 60, 80 yards. A rifled musket, an infield or Springfield, at maybe up to 300 yards maximum range. But these pieces would be hitting over 1 mile away. Attention! Battery! With shell! 800 yards! Load! With shell, 800 yards! The gunner would repeat the command. The gentleman at the back at the limber, he would be cutting the fuses. I called for common shell, so that is an explosive shell. The gunner is in charge of aiming and directing the piece. Each pair of guns had a lieutenant, and each pair was called a section. So you would be 2 or 3 sections in a battery, and that was commanded by a captain. In volunteer service, the highest rank in the artillery was a captain. In the regulars, you'd have an artillery battalion in U.S. service, and they were commanded by a colonel. That would be 4 to 6 batteries of artillery. And usually that colonel sat in Washington because the batteries were pieced out. Gunners are letting me know that their piece is primed and ready to fire. When they fire the piece, you don't have to cover your ear, just open your mouth. In between your middle ear and your throat is an eustachian tube on either side, and that will equalize the pressure on your eardrum. But if you really don't believe me, just put your fingers in. Firing by piece! From the right! 3-second interval. Commence fire. Fire.
Fire. That's cool.
That's scary.
Oh, that's cool.
That's scary, Dad.
Each person on the piece had a specific duty. At the very front and on the right was the #1 man. #1 man's responsibility was to sponge out the burning embers from the previous round. If you see on that long staff he holds, there's a sponge. That's sheepskin, and that would be moistened. It wouldn't be dripping wet, but it would be wet enough that when it's placed down all the way to the back of the barrel of the breech and twisted, that would put out burning embers from the previous round. You don't want to put another powder bag in when you have embers. Right. Have you ever seen a blacksmith work? When he pumps the bellows, it heats up, right? When you take that sponge and you pass air up through the vent at the very back, it will fan any burning embers. So I want to make sure, one, it's covered. So the number 3 man to the right and rear had a thumb stall, a leather piece on his thumb. And he would hold that over the vent, which is a touch hole that goes from the top rear of the barrel down into the center of the breech at the rear of the piece. So that would stop the wind. That would stop the air movement. And then they would sponge it out and reload. The number 2 man, front and left, his responsibility was to take the charge and place it in the muzzle so the number 1 could ram it home. And the number 4 man, his responsibility was to actually put the primer, which was a brass tube filled with gunpowder, and at the top it had fulminated mercury. And that fulminated mercury reacts to friction and heats up. So when a wire is pulled through the top, when they pull that lanyard, it pulls a brass wire through, heats the fulminated mercury, ignites the gunpowder, shoots the flame down through the vent, and ignites the powder bag. It's very efficient, and it's not subject to weather. Okay? That was an improvement sometime after the Mexican War. Number 5 man, when we have them, some of these are reduced crew today. Number 5's responsibility was to bring the round up and give it to number 2. If we were actually in combat with a battery, we would have the piece and its limber, which is the device that tows the battery. If you can see on the back, down near the axle, you'll see a key and a hook. It's called a pintle hook. And on the back of the gun at the bottom of the trail is a lunette, very solid piece of round iron that's got a hole in the center. That lifts up and is placed on the hook, the key is placed and it's locked into place, and then they can move the piece. That same type of pintle hook device is used even today in the military. They still use those, that type of towing device. Also, in the battery you had a limber like this, drawn by 6 horses, and a caisson, which was a single axle device that hooked to the limber like the gun. It had 2 ammunition chests and a spare wheel. So each piece had a limber and a caisson, and each piece had a reserve limber and caisson. So a battery of 6 guns would have approximately 110 officers and men and around 150 horses to move the battery. That is about the same size as an infantry company. That's why they're commanded by a captain. Battery! Canister! Load! Canister! Load! Canister turns these pieces into a big shotgun. A canister round uses the same amount of black powder. There's a tin can. It's filled with approximately 50 steel or lead balls, about the size of my thumb. So when that discharges, the canister, the can, is very brittle and it will split, and it becomes a very large shotgun. We've actually fired canister with our pieces. We did a demonstration at Fort Knox several years ago, and the range officer was not happy. He was a captain. We cut down about 20 of his aluminum silhouette targets, which he's responsible for. Luckily, the fellow that invited us was a colonel, so we were good.